Welcome to the Cloud Pod, where the forecast is always cloudy. We talk weekly about all things AWS, GCP, and Azure. We are your hosts,
Justin,
Jonathan,
Ryan,
and Peter.
Episode 210, recorded for the week of April 26th, 2023. The Cloud Pod deep inspects itself. Good evening, Ryan and Matthew. How's it going?
It's going well.
Yeah, good. It's been a busy week, as usual, and we are recording a little later this week, so we can actually pick up earnings early. So we get to do earnings today. But there's also lots of cloud news, once again, as usual, and all of the fun associated to that. So let's run into the news here. First off, though, I want to pimp the Finops X Foundation Conference. So Finops Foundation, of course, is the number one Finops-based user group, and you can join that by joining the Finops website. And then they have their annual conference coming up June 29th through the 30th in beautiful San Diego, California. You can join your fellow practitioners where they'll be sharing all their Finops knowledge, collaborating on chalk talks and networking together. Plus, there'll be a beautiful award party on a deck of an aircraft carrier on the last day. And most importantly, I will be there. I have booked a ticket. I will be there, and I will have stickers. And if you're part of the Finops Foundation and are going to be at the Finops X event, I will see you there. Just look for me and ask for a sticker, and I will provide it to you. So do check that out if you're interested in all things Finops. Looking at the agenda of what they're covering at the conference, quite a few really good sessions going to be on the books.
It's very cool. It's nice to see things opening up and participating in the world again. Awesome.
Yeah. I'm definitely very intrigued. But yeah, some of the cool items here I saw from the thing as I pulled it up here. Swimming upstream while saving money. Finops lessons from Walmart. That's looked pretty good. How do you do it at scale? How do you do it when you're trying to spend money at the same time? So that's kind of cool. There was another one on the forecasting process and budgeting by Atlassian. Looked really good as well. Automating $100 million in cloud savings sounds intriguing to me, although it looks like it's a vendor pitch, so who knows, but we'll see. You never know. But yeah, lots of good talks. Friends of the show will be there, of course. And then, all kinds of interesting things going on throughout the week, as well as keynotes by all of the great people in the Finops Foundation. So check those out if you're in the foundation, or if you're not, you can sign up and then join the conference yourself. All right. Well, guys, it is earnings season once again, which means plug your ears. And maybe the soundboard will work. Let's try it again. Excellent.
If I wasn't awake before, I am now.
You are now awake, yes. Which is what we had to do to get into earnings, because it can be kind of dry. So you gotta make it exciting. Microsoft was up first on Tuesday with revenue of $52.9 billion, up 7% from a year ago, versus an expectation of $51 billion. Of course, driven mostly by AI, I'm pretty sure. Profits were up 9% from a year ago to $18.3 billion. And most importantly to us, Microsoft Cloud revenue was up 22%, but that is down from the prior year where they had 32% growth in the quarter. So Microsoft Azure continuing to grow, continuing to get bigger, and powered by AI, I expect that's going to continue to be a growth market for them over the next several years.
Yeah, totally. I'm surprised with some of the numbers, just because I wasn't expecting, after so many years of growth, and that it would just continue to rise, even despite sort of the economic headwinds completely shifting. But good job.
Yeah, I feel like at one point some of these numbers have to slow down a little bit.
Well, I mean, it's a lot of big numbers, right? Like to quadruple or triple, billions of dollars in revenue. It gets harder to do, of course. And then especially in recessionary macroeconomic climate, it's hard to generate a profit. We'll talk about someone who's having a little more trouble with that in a little bit. Moving on to Google, revenue was $69.79 billion, which is higher than expected, according to the earnings report. YouTube advertising was back up a little bit, but Google Cloud revenue crossed $7.45 billion. There was an expectation to be about 7.49, so a little bit down below expectations, but most importantly, Google says it's finally generating a profit in its cloud computing business. The unit recorded operating income of $191 million in the quarter, compared to a $706 million loss a year ago. So congratulations, Google. You now have a cash cow to help build your other businesses, just like Amazon does.
I mean, it's got to be a huge load off, and as a GCP customer, it's a definitely a load off for me, because Google will kill things if it doesn't make money. And so I imagine there's a lot of people that have worked really hard to turn this profitable, because it's been up and down in the last couple of years. And looked like it was going in the right direction, and the losses were bigger the following year. And so this is nice. I'm really happy for them.
Yeah, I'm wondering if now they finally stabilize some of the capital expenditures that they've kind of done with all the data center build outs, stuff like that. So now it's a little bit more maintenance and more incremental improvements, but I guess it also depends on how many new regions they open every year.
Yeah. I mean, you have a capital investment you have to make in your existing data centers, plus you have built out of new ones. And then you have fixing what happened in Paris, which has been a bad week in the data center world. If you're in the Europe West 9 region for Google, they've been down since April 25th at 7 o'clock Pacific time. We are recording this on Friday at 6 o'clock, and they're still down. The description from Google is: water intrusion in a data center in Europe West 9 caused a multi-cluster failure that led to a shutdown of multiple zones. Impact is now limited to services in Europe West 9A. There's no ETA for full recovery of operations in Europe West 9A at this time. We expect to see extended outages for some services. Customers are advised to fail over to other zones and regions if they are impacted, which is not great. The bigger issue that I learned out of this whole outage, though, was the fact that availability zones in Google are not like availability zones in AWS.
No, they are not.
So apparently in the Google world, they consider an AZ to be in the same building in some cases, not all cases, but it can be in the same building as long as it has disparate power and cooling systems and electrical network connectivity, for that particular AZ, which is not the same thing as what Amazon talks about. So in this event, they apparently had an issue with the building. Fire suppression system occurred. I think I read that one of their coolant systems leaked onto the batteries, which caused the fire to occur, and then took out switchgear potentially in whatever the cabinet is for Europe West 9A. But then, of course, that caused a ripple through the rest of the building as, of course, everything got shut down for fire suppression, which is not segmentation. So we will talk about this again when they give us a root cause analysis report or post action. But for right now, if you're in that 9A region or availability zone, you are in bad shape. So that's a bit of a bummer. So 3 days so far, and they're not back up. So really bad issue there in France.
It's one of those things. This is the second year in a row. I forget when the big data center fire was in the last telco. It's these are shots fired. All those DR plans that we know aren't going to work. Before it's a disaster, we should look at them, because they do get acted on occasionally. And I don't know if the rate is going to continue, but at this level, but hopefully not. But yeah, no, it
wasn't the last one in France too. Wasn't it so maybe the responses just don't be in France?
Yeah. So OVH was the data center in 2021 that caught on fire and took down that a bunch of stuff for weeks on end. They didn't have backups and a bunch of things, and so there was people who lost data and were very cranky about that in OVH's case. And then if you go back a couple years prior to that, they burned down Notre Dame. So fires in France are maybe a thing.
Mm-hmm. Just avoid the whole country.
Yeah,
you'll be better off.
All right, moving back to earnings, which is more important. Amazon finally finished up the week on Thursday with their earnings report. Amazon said they had $127.4 billion versus expectation from Wall Street of $124.5 billion, which should be good, but the stock market did not react kindly to them. Amazon Web Services was $21.3 billion versus $21.22 billion expected, and that is only a growth of 16% in the first quarter, which is nowhere near the 20% they had the year before. But again, they're growing $21.3 billion. Yeah. I think it's okay that it was only 16%, but apparently Wall Street doesn't agree. Most interesting about their earnings report, though, is that Finops made a big presence known, where they talked about a lot of customers taking advantage of the elasticity of the cloud to reduce their costs, especially in light of uncertain economic conditions. And there was a quote from Andy Jassy, the Amazon CEO, There's a lot to like about how our teams are delivering for customers, particularly amidst an uncertain economy. Our stores business is continuing to improve the cost to serve in our fulfillment network while increasing the speed with which we get products into the hands of customers. Our advertising business continues to deliver robust growth, largely due to our ongoing machine learning investments that help customers see relevant information. And while our AWS business navigates companies spending more cautiously in this macro environment, we continue to prioritize building long-term customer relationships, both by helping customers save money today and enabling them to be more easily leverage technologies with large language models and generative AI with our uniquely cost-effective machine learning chips, the Trainium and Inferentia, manage large language models through Bedrock, and AI Code Companion Code Whisperer. We like the fundamentals we're seeing in AWS, and we believe there's much growth ahead. Thanks, Andy. Appreciate your optimism.
Yeah, and way to shove AI into, a conversation just for no reason.
Exactly.
I was about to say bingo at the end of that because I feel like I heard just like 17 buzzwords all in a row.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree. I could not work on Wall Street. I don't understand why stocks go up and down. It just confuses me. You meet you exceed expectations. You still manage to grow. You've been profitable for a while, and still it's like nah. Next, I don't get it.
Well, it's not like they're not trying. It's a very difficult economic situation out there. Many companies are struggling with growth, especially when they're comparing these companies to pandemic growth, which is not fair. And then, you have people trying to save money now because they're worried the economy is about to fall through the floor at any moment. And so, it's a tough market, and it's tough for everybody. It's not just the cloud providers, but does that mean the gravy train of AWS is over? I don't think so. I think it's just, slightly paused, and people, I think, are taking a few minutes to reassess what makes sense. I did see some posts recently on sysadmin forums, such about moving workloads back from cloud back to on-prem. And there are workloads that should never have been moved to cloud that are very static and, they don't have the economical advantages of using the cloud. And so those decisions will be made, and those decisions should be made all the time when you look at your workloads. But is it a big trend? I don't think it's a trend yet.
Oh, no. I mean, I don't know if the stock value is more to do with their retail business than it is the cloud business as well. But, it cracks me up really because, if I had to predict or make my living predicting the stock market, I would fail miserably, and it would be awful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, you would be much more into spreadsheets than you are. So,
oh God.
I think part of the problem is the companies are doing okay. They're beating Wall Street expectations, but they set expectations for the future quarter as being kind of neutral to a little bit down, or they're caging their bets, in my opinion.
Sure.
And then the stock market just bludgeons them for that. How dare you look at macroeconomic conditions and say that you're not going to have the same amount of growth you had this quarter, next quarter? It's a very punitive market right now in the Wall Street world.
And if you miss your targets, you get in more trouble. But from Wall Street, if you exceed your targets, well, you didn't get your targets right. Feels like they're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
Yeah, you're only in good shape if you manage to exceed their expectations and also predict that exceeding expectations will continue to exist into the future. And then you're fine. And if you don't have those two scenarios, then you're in trouble.
So you have to have exponential growth. It's not that hard.
Yeah, but you can't measure these tech companies the same way you used to. If what you're saying is true that growth at all costs is no longer important, then you can't then punish them for having growth at all costs. It doesn't make sense to me. And and they're laying off a lot of people, and they're doing things to cut down costs, and still record profits are coming out of these companies. So they're not unhealthy companies. So the world has changed. I just don't quite get it yet.
Well, it's because it's gambling, right? It's not. They're betting on whether companies continue to, if it's going to be more valuable in the future. The value of the company and the actual is it worth investing in is completely removed these days. So it's just doesn't make sense by any of the rubrics I use for the stock market.
Yeah, I mean, the people want to put $100 in and get $120 out in 6 months to a year, and the reality is in a bull market or a bear market, you're in a situation where you're going to be holding on to things longer than you used to. It's not a quick buck solution but everyone wants it to be a quick money machine, and it's not.
Yep.
So, all right, well, let's move on to non-technical Wall Street news because we've reached the limit of our knowledge. Yeah. So, AWS is up first as usual. Last week we talked about Code Catalyst and the general availability of it, and we mentioned the $20 per user per month enterprise features, and we mentioned that it needs a little bit more to really get to justify those $20. And they've already released the first thing for it, so apparently listen to us. Although this announcement came out before we published last week's episode, Amazon has released an administrative dashboard for dev environments. The dashboard enables users with space administrator role to centrally view and manage dev environments across your projects. And a space represents your company department, which contains projects, team members, and associated cloud resources created by Code Catalyst. Using the new dashboard, you can view, stop, and delete dev environments belonging to your space. So there you go. You have a one-stop dashboard to see how all your devs are working or not working using Code Catalyst as part of your enterprise features. So keep an eye on that. I expect there'll be more coming out for that over the next few months. Maybe not by the time we publish the next episode, but we'll see.
And I still take credit for it, even though they did this before. They could have possibly got the idea from us.
Well, I do have an Amazon Alexa on my desk, and so it's very possible they're just listening in.
Good point. I have one in here too.
Mine's in the other room because I have too many coworkers that will tell my Alexa just start to play music. No, I think it's great to at least start to build that, as they're building out, to build that single pane of glass for administrators, just because the amount of times that, I've come and looked, I'm like, okay, how do we save money? And the first thing is stop the things that you're not using and delete the things that are dead or, decommissioned already that nobody ever just pulled the plug on. And, at least this gives you that ability to kind of start. So I'm really curious to see what else they innovate on.
Yep. Well, if you have been looking to get S3 compatible storage into your data center and you didn't want to get all of the big expensive stuff, you can now order a Snowball Edge compute optimized device and get S3 compatible storage across all of your internal infrastructure. You can use AWS Ops Hub, which is their management GUI for the Snow services, and the S3 compatible storage at the edge to remotely centralize all the administration of that. This can make it easier to migrate to AWS with your data without having to pay for expensive egress fees or to reduce latency of that transition. You can also use this as an intermediate storage location, which allows the Snow device to handle the replication directly to S3 for you. So you can do the migration off your NetApp or whatever storage solution you want to use on-prem right to the Snowball Edge, and then let it replicate as appropriately to the mothership and object storage, or put it on a UPS truck and ship it in the fastest method possible to the data center, and they will transfer it with their very high-speed internet fabric in the data center itself. So a right way to get your data to AWS and potentially a great way to get your data out.
Yeah, the getting out is a very interesting, it's been very difficult with the amount of cost for data egress. And so is this possibly maybe a recognition of that fact that they completely trap you?
Well, they didn't say specifically data out. That's not part of their press release. It's part of my additional notes to the. But
yeah, fair point.
Yeah, I found in I read the whole article, and in the security section, one thing they called out, to me was it said the device needs the Snow IAM action needs S3 star, and I'm like, why is this under security that you need all permissions for everything in S3? Felt like that's something that I wouldn't call out in the press release, but it's there.
Yeah, they like to call out some of the limitations and some of the gotchas in the blog post, which is always sort of fun. Like, oh, great, you just got all hyped about this great, amazing thing. And I'm like, oh, but read this little note that's going to screw you.
I kind of like that. It's better than finding out the alternative way, which is like, man.
The blog post is great. I don't mind it either, but it is. Yeah. It is one of the funny things as you're reading through it. Like, here's a hype article, and then here's a hope, and bring you back down to earth at the end.
Yeah.
Here's everything you need to know that goes wrong.
Yeah, it also talks about disk failures and stuff like that, about how you can cluster multiple of these together to get a little bit more availability in the event of hard drive failure, so you don't just lose your data. So there is some interesting pieces to it, but the real shots across the bow of hey, if you only have one and the hard drive fails, you're screwed. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, you forget that not everything is 11.9 resilient.
Yeah. Gotta have a strategy.
I do hope someday in my career I get to do a very massive storage migration, not to the point that I need the truck, but right where the point is, and you have to order 100 of these things, then I can build mazes in my data center of Snowball Edge devices. I think that'd be fun.
I kind of want the truck that, I get the 2 armored police cars that drive with it.
Yeah. I mean, that's cool too. Like, I mean, both stories would be awesome to have on your resume. Like, hey, I ordered the snowmobile and, or I built a maze of snow devices in my data center to move all the stuff. I think both stories are great. So either one is good.
I think the truck would lose its luster pretty quick. Like after the first 5 minutes, when you realize that it's like now it's just 9 months of like watching paint dry as data moves over.
Yeah. The Amazon Inspector now supports deep inspection of your EC2 instances. That's what you need to have when, things are going wrong in your instance. Root canal. The continual EC2 scanning features, once activated, will expand the capability of Inspector to now identify software vulnerabilities and application programming languages, including Python, Java, and Node.js packages, and on top of the existing OS package inspection that they have. This is available to you now with no additional charge. And it supports all of your EC2 instances, your Elastic Container Registry, and your Lambda functions at scale to make sure your systems are running as expected and securely, which is great.
Yeah, I had a hard time understanding whether or not this feature is announcing the continual scanning or if that's a feature that was already there. And this is just the additional packages and stuff running that's now in scope of inspection. But,
well, if you're a new customer, which there's only 16% of their growth is from new customers, apparently, it's activated by default. But if you're an existing customer, you can turn it on now. So it's if you're a new account, you already have this. If you're a legacy inspection account, you can turn it on.
Oh, so I got to go do a thing. Cool. Good to know.
Yep. I did it in the CloudPod account. I pointed at our EC2 instance, and I forgot about it until just now as we're talking about it. So I have not checked out what results it came back with, but I expected it to tell me something about PHP or Python or something in my box that's not secure.
I was going to congratulate you. That means you clearly have no vulnerabilities, but there's the,
you're right.
There's the more practical alternative.
Yeah. I mean, the Schrodinger's cat right now is that I don't, or I have a lot. I don't know until I look. And then this story Matt saw on our shows that our topics we didn't really cover and thought this was something we should talk about. So customers with multiple organization units and accounts can now create up to 10 AWS Firewall Manager administrator accounts from an AWS organization to manage their firewall policies. So for those of you who have kept track of Firewall Manager, you basically have an account you designate as the firewall management account, typically a security account or potentially a network operations team account. And then they would be able to manage all of your Amazon firewalls centrally. But that could be limitations because customers want to delegate some responsibilities for firewall administration to maybe security for scope restrictions or to the network team for enabling access or different things. And so you needed to have the ability to have multiple accounts. So having 10 of them now is a nice improvement.
Yeah, and the reason why I kind of thought this was interesting was, a lot of the stuff you could always only delegate to a single account. So things like config admin, the firewall manager, which also includes WAF, and a lot of the other ones, you can only go to one location. So this is kind of nice that you can start to subdivide stuff out, especially if you're an organization that has, potentially multiple acquisitions that you're merging in and whatnot. You still have your own different security teams. You can kind of let them kind of manage their own aspects of it. As potentially a higher level security team doesn't understand every underlying app, and just turning on rules, being like, hey, we need WAF and need this, whatever thing turned on might break a specific app downstream that they might not know about. So it's kind of just interesting to see that they are doing this. I'm curious to see if they expand it to all the other services that have delegated administrators for.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where you run into this the hard way, which is, if you delegate it to a security account, and then the nature of just, the amount of requests and the velocity ends up to be a blocking unit, right? And now you've locked everyone who could do anything about that, out by delegating it. So I like this pattern. I hope to see it continue, and I hope it expands out to multiple services through organizations.
Yep. Let's move on to Google. So there's a blog post directly from Sundar Pichai himself talking about their AI organization. He likes to point out that they were the AI first company since 2016, which didn't work out so well for them. But they point out all of their AI enhancements, including the camera and the Pixel phone, And he said over the time, they basically have created 2 world-class research teams leading the entire industry forward with foundational breakthroughs that have ushered in the new era of AI. But the pace is now, of course, faster than ever. And as Google is woefully behind, as we've made fun of them multiple times about it, to address this, Sundar has decided that creating a unit that will help build a more capable system more safely and responsibly. And they'll be combining these 2 leading AI research teams into a new team called Google Deepmind, which will bring together the 2 leading research teams on AI field, the Brain team from Google Research and the original DeepMind team. These teams have built things like AlphaGo, WaveNet, deep reinforcement learning, and system frameworks like TensorFlow and JAX. Combining these units into one focused team, backed by the computational resources of Google, will significantly accelerate Google's progress in AI. And we actually talked about this a few weeks ago, where we read an article about how Google was keeping their scientists away from their practitioners, and that was causing a lot of the delays. And so this is a step in the right direction in general.
Yeah, I kind of feel like this press release is, hey, we realized we're behind. We realized we were in front and we fell behind. And here's what we're going to do to kind of re-level set and, try to take back over the industry.
I think, yeah, I mean, it's funny to me because I really think that they're not really behind in terms of AI. And I think they got caught off guard when it all pivoted to be directly exposed to the consumer. Google is very clearly building back-end AIs for product purposes. The AI that handles, image processing in the phones, like they mentioned, search results, all those things. They were clearly going to try to build it into products and not really expose it directly to customers. And the whole thing went left on them. And now it looks like they're playing catch up. And they're like, well, but we did this forever. Yeah.
We built it. We were AI first.
Yeah, you can shout it all you want, but you didn't go first to market. So nope.
Exactly.
Have you been waiting months and months to hire your new AWS, GCP, or Azure architect, only to have them be poached at the 11th hour by a startup with a juice bar? Initiatives stalled because you're having trouble hiring? Well, I have a simple solution: Foghorn Consulting. Foghorn Consulting provides top-notch cloud engineers to the world's most innovative companies and can be burning down your DevOps and cloud backlogs as soon as next week. Foghorn certified AWS, GCP, and Azure professionals are armed with infrastructure as code, and from day one will be designing performant, optimized cloud-native or hybrid environments that deliver on the promise of cloud. Their FogOps solution even provides on-demand cloud engineering to augment your existing teams. Visit www.foghornconsulting.com or send an email to cloudtalentnow@foghornconsulting.com and tell them the CloudPod sent you. Your dedicated FogOps team is with you for the long haul, and they bring their own juice.
Well, Bard, speaking of AI investments, has gotten some new capabilities. They're still not allowed in the Google workspaces, so this is still for personal use only, but Bard can now officially help you with programming and software development tasks, including code generation, debugging, and code explanation. They support over 20 programming languages, including C++, Golang, Java, JavaScript, Python, and TypeScript. You can easily export Python code to Google Colab with no copy and paste required to collaborate with your peers. Bard can also help you write functions for your Google Sheets, which thank goodness, because writing macros and functions in Google Sheets or Excel is horrendous. And Bard can help explain code snippets to you. So when Ryan gives me code now, I can just type it into Bard and say, what the hell was Ryan thinking? And apparently it will tell me now what was up with that. This is great if you're learning programming for the first time, or if you need some additional support to understand Ryan's craziness at 3 a.m. Sadly, they want the Bard is still early and may provide inaccurate. Or they warn that Bard is still early and may provide inaccurate, misleading, or false information, and may provide you code that is not optimal or incomplete or doesn't produce the right output. But then they point out that Bard can also help you fix it if it is broken, which is sort of a weird flip of the script there.
It is at this point that I want to remind our listeners that I am also capable of providing inaccurate, misleading, or false information, and definitely provides code that's not optimal or non-functional.
If you make fun of Ryan's code, don't look at mine then.
I'm really impressed with like the speed of which these things are getting better, and like how dramatically more improvement is in each iteration. Like GP3 to 4. This newer version of Bard, which I don't know if they have a version of it, but it's very clearly different when you use it. It's just the speed at which these things are going in is crazy to me. And so it's, it is very interesting times, and I can't wait to see how it all shakes down. But yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't shake down with a lot of people losing their jobs. But that's my only concern about all of this AI stuff. But
it's going to change, right? Yeah, it's going to be like manufacturing.
Yeah, and you'll become like your skill set will become how do you make the AI actually code the code that's good, and how do you use the AI to tune it, and because it's not gonna you're not gonna have to write the simple code anymore, but you're still gonna have to know how to talk to the AI and do magic, and so there'll be an evolution. It'll be interesting to see it and how it goes through, and I'm sure my kids will be AI experts, and I'll be old man screaming at AI saying this is ridiculous. Just want to answer my question, but we'll get there.
Hey, old stodgy, bank companies are still on their mainframes, and there's always going to be that, the old thing. Although I did read an article about AI can generate code in Fortran and COBOL, so maybe it'll just fix that too.
Perhaps if you can start writing assembly code on top of all this, then the AI can take over. So.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, if you are looking for confidential computing on Google, they have a new N2D machine that leverages the AMD Secure Encrypted Virtualization Secured Nesting Pages, or AMD SEV-SNP for short. These new instances are built upon memory encryption and add new hardware-based security protections, such as strong memory integrity, encrypted register state, thanks to the encrypted SEV-ES, and hardware-rooted remote attestation, so you can guarantee that your hardware is good and that's tested for all of your compliance needs. So if you're looking for these on Google, these are brand new to you on the N2D capability, which is their AMD family N2.
And CloudPod would like to sincerely apologize to our listeners that Jonathan's not here to actually explain what this is, or to the rest of the hosts, so that we can talk about it more. No idea.
The concept of confidential compute, whatever, confidential VMs, whatever all the other names are, is always a really interesting concept. And once you get to the point when you have all your logs off and you aren't logging into your machines and you're doing everything stateless and everything along those lines, I don't understand why more companies don't leverage them. It's a great just way to, from a security standpoint, just say like, we can't log into them and they're secure. I know that there is a decently cost lift on some of these to do, which is probably part of the reason, unless if you have a business need for it. But the idea of just, here's hardware that you can never log into, besides blowing most developers' minds, it always feels like a really interesting concept for me. I've always wanted to play with them more.
There's the cost lift of running it, but then, I think the biggest hurdle is really just the operations model just doesn't support it, right? Like, we're still an industry that's trying to get, CI/CD, foundational things in some companies, right? So it's the idea of being able to run a workload like this and keep it up, I think, is still a bridge too far.
Yeah, I feel like it's terrifying to most people. Oh my God, what do you mean we can't connect to the box? Like, how are we going to handle it? Well, you don't. You just delete it and let a new one come back in.
Yeah.
But obviously, debugging becomes exponentially more difficult because you can't just say, hey, go get me the memory dumps, or hey, let me go grab this extra log that we didn't know existed.
Yeah, observability becomes a big deal in these applications very quickly. I mean, I think the other big lift is that most dev teams are already buried trying to get features out, and then to say, oh, you have to go modify your code to use this confidential computing thing. I think that's also becomes a problem for a lot of companies. And again, it goes back to the business driver. If you have the driver to do it, then you're going to make the investment. But if you don't, it's sort of like, I'll get to it eventually, and you never do.
Oh, see, I always understood it was just like swap out the instance type from one to the other. I didn't realize there's actual other things that you have to change.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be able to access the memory. You have to be able to do some things. So there are some changes, at least in the first generations of confidential compute. We're about to talk about the Intel TDX, which doesn't require that in a second. But the AMD does require some recompilation to be able to support the different modules here for security and encryption.
And there's your segue.
Yeah, the segue on the Azure, where they are announcing the new DC ESV5 and EC ESV5 series confidential VMs with the Intel TDX chip. So if you did not like your AMD confidential VMs from Google, when you really wanted Intel, Azure has you covered. They feature the 4th generation Intel Xeon scalable processors The VMs are backed by an all-new hardware-based trusted execution environment called Intel Trust Domain Extensions, or TDX. And the selling feature is that organizations can use these VMs to seamlessly bring confidential workloads to the cloud without any code changes to their apps. The DC variant has ability up to 96 vCPU and 385 gigs of memory, and the EC variant will go to 64 vCPU and up to 512 gigs of memory. Since you may want to also attest the environment, Azure can retrieve hardware evidence for cryptographic verification just like Google could. Organizations will have native support for attestation with Microsoft Azure attestation feature, and they have worked closely with Intel on support for Project Amber, which is Intel's upcoming trust services to help enterprises that want to enforce operator independence and separation of duties in deploying confidential computing.
I like that. The attestation service. I mean, I want to see that pattern grow across cloud as well. Like I love the idea of being able to attest your state and verify compliance via API request. That's fantastic.
As a person who's had to collect evidence for many audits, anything to automate that stuff and to get confidence is always a big deal. A little bit more on this Project Amber. I looked it up because I hadn't heard of it before. It's Intel's groundbreaking service. It's a SaaS-based implementation of an independent trust authority that provides attestation of workloads in a public-private multi-cloud environment, so it can cross both your private and public needs. It provides you a trusted execution environment, a root of trust, and more of the services operational independent from the cloud edge infrastructure provider itself. So if you don't trust Amazon, Azure, or Google, you can trust Intel, which maybe is a little bit weak, but is available to you there. Single trust authority integrates with all your cloud providers for multi-cloud and designed to be cloud agnostic, all tied to Amber. So exciting to kind of see where they continue to drive that as they are doing many, many announcements this year on this particular framework.
At one point, you have to trust someone.
Yep. I don't know if I trust Intel, though. I was there for Heartbleed or whatever the other one was. It wasn't Heartbleed. It was one of the other code execution vulnerabilities.
It's going to drive me crazy now.
The body doesn't like to remember pain, so I don't remember either.
I know, I block it out.
Spectra.
And
Meltdown,
that's right. Heartbleed was the OpenSSL one. Yeah.
Which I feel like all those from memory, or I've just merged them all together in my memory, were like a 3-month span.
Yeah, they were all around the same time. So I consider them all the Heartbleed era, and like I was doing a lot of patching and getting a lot of really bad performance out of my hardware because none of this stuff was optimized anymore. That's great. So of course, the macroeconomic climate is quite difficult these days, and so Microsoft is here with 4 cloud cost optimization strategies for you to use with Microsoft Azure. And as we go through this here in a second, if you've done all these things, I may again plug the Finops X Foundation Conference to teach you other ways to potentially do this. Because once you do these 4 things they talk about, really all of your cost savings comes from architecture shifts and other more complicated solutions than the 4 that they're going to give you here in a second. But Azure points out that there are several benefits to cost optimization, which is the first time I've ever seen these 4 from them. So the first one is understanding, measuring, optimizing, and tracking your cloud costs, which is the duh. The next one was reduce carbon emissions. I'm like, oh, okay, I like that. Improving the performance of the app. I don't think anyone's talked about FinOps in the context of improving the performance of the app. And savings can be driven towards innovation. So they're basically saying, what you're not spending on Azure, you can respend on innovation in your product or in your services. And of course, the 4 main cost saving strategies from Azure. Number 1, right sizing, which is where everyone should start, is right sizing. Number 2 is cleaning up unused resources, which, yep, you should definitely do that. 3 is buying reservations and savings plans. So commit more money to Microsoft, which is great. And then number 4, which is a new one that I hadn't seen on the cost thing, is database and application tuning, which is definitely a good idea, especially if you're trying to get bigger boxes because your app doesn't scale. Some tuning might help you out, which would be nice. But they have this great ChatGPT thing. Why can't they make an AI service to help me tune my app? That'd be cool. Do that for me.
Go tune all my database calls. That would also be useful. All my SQL calls.
Yes.
Feels like it's coming.
They actually have that. I know in Azure, if you load up, I think it's in the databases or in one of the fields, it will tell you like, hey, go add an index to this thing, and it should help, increase your performance, and like more at the SQL level than like the actual SQL query level. But I thought that was kind of always interesting. I really feel like number 2 here, cleanup, is always ridiculously hard because everyone's like, oh, it's in the cloud. It's only like 2 cents a gigabyte or 3 cents a gigabyte. Like, who cares? But people forget that, hey, if you're doing 200, 2,000, gigabytes, approaching terabytes per day, and all you're doing is aggregating and you're never cleaning up, starts to add up to real money real fast.
All right, let's move on to Oracle. OCI has a new multi-cloud architect course and certification. Certification is ideal for cloud architects interested in designing and building multi-cloud solutions utilizing Oracle services, which, okay. Oracle contends that multi-cloud is the new normal, especially if you're using Oracle databases and want to save a ton of money on your licensing. And the Oracle Learning Platform is your one-stop shop to get ready for multi-cloud certification tests with video courses, skill checks, exam preps, practice exams, online certification exams, and credentials, and more, all available to you if you want to become an OCI multi-cloud architect. I don't know that'll help your salary, but you could get it and have a pretty badge.
Yeah, I don't know many people that recommend Oracle Cloud, but the ones that do probably have an architecture certification.
And have to have the multi-cloud architecture certification to get a job afterwards. I kind of want to go do this to see what's in it. But at the same point, I feel like I have so many better things to do with my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, I could do this, or I could get my Finops certification while I'm at the event. I think I might get my Finops certification. It seems like a better use of my time.
So quickly looking at the exam guide, there's 4 main sections: multi-cloud introduction and use cases, core OCI services, so just OCI,
Commercial,
multi-cloud network connectivity, and Oracle database services for Azure, which is 40% of the exam.
Yeah,
wow,
which is just a direct connect between Azure and OCI. So you definitely need a full architectural course on how to use that.
It's 40%. It's not multi-cloud at that point. It's a single other cloud.
Yeah. It's less of a certification, more of a commercial for its service. Yeah. Which,
I don't know.
To a certain point, all certifications are, but.
In the multi-cloud network connectivity, the 3.2, and there's only the two subsections, is implementation of OCI to Azure interconnect. So really, I feel like this is an OCI to Azure exam.
Yes. But that's multi-cloud.
Yeah.
Because they don't have that partnership with Google or with Azure, or with Amazon. So, good try, Oracle. Nice try, but I see right through you.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to our Cloud Journey series where we're going to talk about state. And for all of you who are like, state, the only type of state that we care about is stateless. That is a true statement for most of the people who have been building web applications for the last 10 or 15 years or so, because state isn't web scale. So as you kind of move into this new world of cloud native, one of the biggest drivers, of course, for stateless architecture is that it provides resiliency from failures, recovery strategies in the event of a failure, and the option to scale processing capacity up and down to handle variances in your traffic. And in many cases, building stateless is still the right thing to do, but not in all cloud native architectures. And so this is where we're going to start here, guys. You've been all preached to for 15 years to build stateless. And now I'm saying maybe you should build state. What do you guys think?
I mean, I would argue that we've always built state. We've been building towards stateless to understand how to manage our state and not rely and make assumptions about our state. But very little that I've worked on doesn't have a state somewhere.
Yeah, it's sort of funny. I was reading some research before the article, and someone was saying, managing state is much more complicated and much more trouble to deal with, and blah blah blah. I'm like, yeah, but that's what they've been doing forever. Everyone's built state first.
There's always state somewhere. So whether it's in your SQL or your caching layer or somewhere, if you're using like session caches or anything like that, there's still always state. Otherwise, what are you doing? Like, cool, here's something that's completely transitive. Like, you always need something somewhere. It's just, it's really a lot of times like consolidating it to very specific points.
Yeah. Well, the thing about state, when you go stateless, because you are managing that state, now you have to deal with, where does the remote session state exist? Where does state persistence happen at? And is that in an event, or is it in a caching layer, like you mentioned, or something much more ugly than that? But the big thing around this particular article and kind of thinking about state and stateless is that really the advantation of eventing, and eventing is being kind of the new driver into how to think about stateful apps. And so if you can build a Kafka queue that all of your things happening in a shopping cart transaction, for example, every state is an event. So I add something to my cart, that's an event. I added nothing else, that's a different event. I remove it from my cart, that's a different event. And all of those events can be correlated into a Kafka queue. I can then replay that at any point in time of your transaction. Because I have that little state, I can have lots of really interesting redundancy use cases. I can use this for SQL Server replication versus using native SQL Server transactions. I can, once I have that message in a thing, I can have multiple subscribers to it. So every different subscriber can now make an update to it and update state as well. And so you really are taking state from a very single monolithic use case, and you're distributing state into a microservices architecture that then you need to correlate state across the system. That's where eventing really kind of helps you out. And something like Kafka or other key value storage systems could potentially fix this issue for you.
Yeah, I wonder if that's really the challenge with thinking about state in a cloud native world, is just, maybe just by the sheer name of it, like we're already off to the wrong start, right? Because that's sort of what the arguments turn into, which is, well, how would I see a customer's configuration? How would I troubleshoot? Do I have to replay the queue for everything? Isn't that going to affect everyone? That kind of thing. And it's like, well, yeah, all right. You just need to think about this a little differently. It's still state. It's distributed now. It's not in one place. You don't have it indexed by a customer ID or something very specific. You have to take a new approach about how you manage these things and how you support applications with a distributed state.
Yeah, but that's also, people, again, they're very stuck in an ODBC, OLTP based workload where, point in time recovery means all point in time activities are now rolled back or rolled forward. Where in an eventing world, because of the way that we do eventing and the way you output metadata with the event, you can actually say, well, I only want the events tied to Ryan or to Matt. I don't want the events tied to Justin. So I only want to see his history of his state over a period of time, and I want to roll it back or forward for Matt or for Ryan. I'm not necessarily rolling it back for Justin because Justin finished his transaction or whatever. And so this is, also how things like you get chased around the web with email saying, hey, you left something in your cart occur, because they know that you are, they know a customer ID. They know that you added and removed things from your cart and you left something in the cart and you went away from the website and they're like, oh, you left something in your cart. Now I can tell you, hey, you abandoned it. I want to give you 20% off if you come back right now and buy it. That's how all those schemes are basically empowered. But like that model would never have been possible in a prior OLTP version, 10 years ago. And so this is, again, thinking differently about your apps as you think about cloud native, is that where does eventing make sense? And then how do you think about state with regard to that eventing? And how do I then pull those pieces together?
I feel like the big difference between, what the industry is seeing of like, okay, we've gone from, web servers to containers to, and kept going down to like, container orchestration management platforms, stuff like that, is this is a big, all that's been slowly iterated on at the top level, of like, okay, there's just the web app, and it now we manually install on the server versus now we bake an AMI versus now we build a container and deploy the container, where it's all very incremental steps. And this is really a fundamental change, I feel like, of behind the scenes, there was always that SQL or whatever it was that was running everything where the state was. And this is really a big fundamental change of how the state is stored and how people have to really think about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right on the right track. So, one of the things that I find most annoying about most of these systems in how we talk about session state replication is really, how do you do that? And so there's really a couple different ways that you are typically going that. You can use a very simple caching layer like Redis or Memcache. But then people decided service discovery was going to be a big thing. And we decided that etcd and Console and Zookeeper were going to be the future of all things on this. And the big thing about these three services is that they're all based on consensus protocols. And I have a love-hate relationship with consensus protocols. I personally don't really care for some of them, and I know Ryan cares for other ones. And at the end of the day, it's a fight that is worth having. So, Ryan, tell me why I'm wrong about Zookeeper being a terrible, terrible solution with its lovely, lovely consensus protocol.
Well, I will say that I don't think that I could defend like a Zookeeper versus more modern consensus like etcd. Like, they're built at different times.
I mean, etcd controls is behind Kubernetes, so I feel like I'm already winning because the market loves Kubernetes.
Oh no! I mean, it's the argument we always have is just, is it the tool or is it how the tool is used, right? And so my argument is that if you cram too much into etcd, you're going to have the same problems as you do in Zookeeper. I will say that, like Zookeeper was built forever ago. And so like it, while it's really mature and, has a lot of features, it's still kind of old. And, there's some clunky bits, especially around like the Java implementation, especially if you don't like writing in Java. But it's one of those things where I think it's really important to understand that if you're distributing anything and you're cramming so much data into it that it becomes very difficult to reach a consensus about a state, any system is going to have trouble. And so that's where we run into issues. I think that when designing applications, it's much easier to just default to all. Right? I'm going to put everything in this distributed state management, and I'm going to trust it to communicate and correlate all these things. And you can do that with both Zookeeper and etcd. And if you start leaning on that too heavily, when eventually you can't reach quorum, you can't elect a leader, all kinds of badness is going to happen, So like it's more along the lines of like, how do we use state? How do we manage it? And how do we keep it lightweight? And how do we make sure that we're only storing stateful elements that we need to manage?
Well, I think this is, I agree with you. I think at the end of the day, anytime you're dealing with a distributed state management system that has to get to quorum, you can't overload it. And that's probably the biggest mistake people make with using etcd and Zookeeper is they try to shove everything into it. And, honestly, I see the same problem happen in Kafka too. Now, of course, Kafka is built on top of, I believe, etcd as well, or maybe it's Zookeeper on a Kafka. I don't remember.
I think it's Zookeeper.
Zookeeper on that one, yeah. I can't even keep track of it because it's like we're talking about the inner workings of a lot of products. Like, hey, that's Console over there, and this is Zookeeper over there in etcd, and you only find out when it blows up horrifically, and then you're like, oh, because it's Zookeeper. Okay, great. Now I have to go figure that out.
And that's how I know that it's built on, that Kafka uses Zookeeper under the hood
because it's blown up.
Yep.
So one of the key things is with a lot of people do with Kafka is they try to put these huge messages into the event. Like they try to put 10 megabits, 20 megabit event messages, and now they're relying on etcd Zookeeper to basically replicate that across the quorum. That just doesn't work. Where people who've used Kinesis for a long time, they know that you can't do that. You put the object into S3, you put a pointer record to it, and again, that's a different type of cloud native design thinking pattern of because object storage isn't like spinning disk storage, and it's not sequential and it's not blocks. It's just I'm making a URL call that all of a sudden everything becomes much easier. So the event doesn't have to be so heavy in the process, and so those are typically where you see successful implementations of Zookeeper and these different technologies is when they're using it for the right reasons and with the right data constraints. And when they don't do that, that's when all hell breaks loose.
I feel like most of these things are more how the tool is leveraged than what the tool is. You can do any of these things. You can do anything with any of these things, but you got to make sure that you're not overloading them, like we've said, or hitting edge cases of what the tool can use. And, making sure that you're kind of doing what the tool does well. Like you said, replicating 10, 20 megabytes, try to build a quorum, it's not a good practice. I know I've tried. It's really bad. With any of these things is really just making sure that you keep them lightweight, moving quickly through. And that way you're not overwhelming anything.
Mm-hmm. And you're not serializing your data flows, right? Because that's the other thing. Like the main reason people want to put all that data into a Kafka event is so that they can process it, right? And they don't have to go fetch it from somewhere else, and that's so that they can do it in line real quick and then return the answer. And that can be disastrous when it doesn't work. And so the minute you do things in a serial nature that way, and you keep them tightly coupled together, if one of those processes has an issue, then one of those processes has an issue, and then now everything's out of sync, and you end up having to replay. So the Kinesis model is, I sort of stumbled upon it, but it's really informed my architecture by having those limitations, creating those patterns where I don't expect to sort of leverage the same thing. I orchestrate a lot more. I guarantee my results. I validate my schemas, and all all of these checks and balances that I have as part of the logic, so I don't make too many assumptions that this will all just fall along the happy path and work as expected. And, I think that's coming up, starting with Zookeeper, you think, I took a very similar sort of path with managing that state. And, I was like, I'm going to be very careful with what's in there. Like, it was a lot of, I didn't, these were brand new technologies to me and I didn't trust it. Was a lot of it, but it was, it was like, this is cool. And I definitely don't want to maintain, coming back from failure of my application. So let's pick and choose the right elements to store that I can have everything rehydrate as needed from there. It's just good patterns that to make your app design, much more resilient and, and easy. Although it feels more complex when you're writing it down on boxes, drawing diagrams.
It's funny because most of my hatred of Zookeeper actually comes out of the fact that Elasticsearch uses it pretty heavily for its quorum. But I've been burned by all three of them at one point or another in my career: Zookeeper, etcd, and console. Just the Zookeeper wounds have been the deepest. And I think again, it's just Zookeeper in its nature and the way it's designed, because you can just shove JSON objects into it like crazy. It gets abused a lot more often, where etcd is typically more key value store. Again, you could shove a JSON object into that too, but because it's more designed as a key value store, you kind of avoid some of that pain. And then console is another, really true key value store type solution versus Zookeeper, which is JSON all the way down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is true. It's funny to think of it that way, because it is, the more sort of key, like if I think about those three in order, right? Console, etcd, and Zookeeper, like they go from, I forget which direction I did now, but one is, the key valueness of them, the simplicity of like thing equals thing. And it correlates to the amount of pain and suffering I've had in my career, right? So like I've had the least with console because it's like, thing equals thing. I got this,
Yeah,
we can all agree that thing equals thing. That's all we got to do, and it doesn't break in a spectacular way where you're trying to recover terribleness.
Yeah, I think the only one I've been burned by actually is etcd. I've had to help a customer through a big console outage back in the day. So I have a little bit of like, looking at it, but very closely being like, okay, be nice, don't break on me, after a few scar tissues around that one.
I've seen some pretty horrendous etcd disasters, but typically driven by bad Kubernetes practices and bad Kubernetes providers and things that you're putting in there that didn't understand etcd. That's typically the most common scenario I've seen with etcd, with Kubernetes in particular. And then, in the case of console, because it really came from that service discovery and very key value pair orientated site, you don't have a lot of people building really complicated things on it. Plus it's not open source like Zookeeper and etcd are. So, you're not going to see Apache adopt console, which is potentially a paid enterprise offering. And so I think that's also part of the reason why we don't see console in as much pain, because it's not trying to be used by 1,000 open source projects with, varying degrees of success. Plus I do like the Surf gossip protocol just a little bit better than I like Raft. But all gossip protocols have their own disaster stories that we could get into as well.
That's true too.
All right. Well, that's a lot about state. Well, if you have questions about state or any of our Cloud Native Journey series, you can always ping us at pod@thecloudpod.net, or you can ping us on our Slack team as usual. And that is it for another fantastic week here in the cloud. Thank you, Matt and Ryan. Sorry we couldn't get Jonathan here today. He had some car troubles and was not able to make it. But hopefully we'll all be back in the show next week and we can cover the latest in cloud news once again.
Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is the Week in Cloud. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Foghorn Consulting. Subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and tweet us your feedback at #TheCloudPod. Or join our Slack channel, go to our website, thecloudpod.net for sign-up instructions.